It was a calm afternoon on the 5th of December 1872 when the English ship Gracia sighted a two-masted brig pursuing an erratic course in the North Atlantic, midway between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. As they came closer, they could see that she was sailing with only a jib and foretop set sail. Moreover, the jib was set to port, while the vessel was on a starboard tack. This is a sure sign to any sailor worth his salt that this ship was out of control and likely without crew. Captain Morehouse of the Gracia signalled the mysterious vessel but received no answer. The sea was running high after recent squalls, and it took a full 2 hours before Morehouse could get close enough to read the name of this vessel. This ship was called the Mary Celeste. Morehouse knew this American ship and her master, Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs. Less than a month ago, both vessels had been loading cargo on neighbouring piers of New York's East River. The Mary Celeste had set sail for Genoa with a cargo of crude alcohol on the 5th of November. This was 10 days before the De Gracia had sailed for Gibraltar. But now, a month later, she was drifting in the mid-Atlantic with no signs of life. Morehouse decided to send a 3-man boarding party to investigate. This party was led by his first mate, Oliver Devoe, a strong, physically brave man. As they clambered aboard, they saw that the ship's decks were deserted, and a search below revealed that there was not a living soul on board. But the lifeboat was missing. Captain Briggs deduced that the crew had decided to abandon ship. There was a great deal of water below decks. 2 sails had been blown away, and the lower foretop sails were hanging only by their corners. Yet the ship seemed seaworthy, and was certainly in no danger of sinking. Why had the crew abandoned her? Further research revealed that the binnacle, the box containing the ship's compass, had been smashed in, and the compass itself was broken. 2 cargo hatches had been ripped off, and one of the casks of crude alcohol had been stowed in. Both forward and aft storage lockers contained a plentiful supply of food and water. The seamen's chests were still in the crew's quarters, an indication of the haste in which the ship had been deserted. But a search of the captain's cabin revealed that the navigation instruments and navigation logs were missing. The last entry in the general log was dated the 25th of November. This means that the Mary Celeste had sailed without crew for at least 9 days, and that she was now some 700 nautical miles northeast of her last recorded position. Apart from Captain Briggs and the crew of 7, the Mary Celeste had also sailed with Briggs' wife Sarah and his 2-year-old daughter Sophia Matilda. Faced with the mystery of why they had abandoned ship for no obvious reason, Morehouse experienced a certain superstitious alarm, as mariners are wont to. But then Devoe suggested that 2 of the De Gracia's crew should set sail the Mary Celeste for Gibraltar. It was the prospect of £5,000 sterling in salvage money that finally made him agree to Devoe's scheme. Both ships arrived in Gibraltar 6 days later, and instead of the welcome he expected, Devoe was greeted by an English customs official who nailed an order of immediate arrest to the Mary Celeste's mainmast. The date, significantly, was Friday the 13th. From the beginning, the Mary Celeste had been an unlucky ship. She had been registered originally as the Amazon, and her first captain had died within 48 hours. On her maiden voyage, she was hit by a fishing weir off the coast of Maine. This damaged her hull. While this was being repaired, a fire broke out midships. Later, while sailing through the Straits of Dover, she hit another brig, which sank. This had occurred under the 3rd captain. Her 4th accidentally run the ship aground on Cape Breton Island and wrecked her. The Amazon was salvaged and passed through the hands of 3 more owners before she was bought by J. H. Winchester, the founder of a successful shipping line in New York. Winchester discovered that the brig, which was now renamed the Mary Celeste, had dry rot in her timbers, and he had bottom rebuilt with copper lining and the deck cabin lengthened. These repairs had ensured that the ship was in excellent condition before she had sailed for Genoa, under the experienced Captain Briggs. This helped to explain why she had survived so long in the wintry Atlantic after the crew had taken to the lifeboat. British officials at Gibraltar seemed to suspect either mutiny or some strange plot, The latter theory based on the fact that Captain Morehouse and Captain Briggs had been friends, and had apparently dined together the day before the Mary Celeste had sailed from New York. But at the inquiry that followed, the idea of mutiny seemed to have gained favour. To back this theory, the Court of Inquiry had shown an axe mark on one of the ship's rails, scoring on her hull that was described as a crude attempt to make the ship look as if she had hit the rocks, and a sustained sword had been found beneath the captain's bunk, broken and chipped. All this, it was claimed, pointed to the crew getting drunk, killing their master and his family, and escaping in the ship's boat. The Americans were assaulted by what they felt was a slur on the honour of the US Merchant Navy, and indignantly denied this story. They pointed out that Briggs was not only known to be a fair man, who was not likely to provoke the crew of his mutiny, but also that he ran a dry ship. The only alcohol on the Mary Celeste was the cargo, and even a thirsty sailor were not likely to drink more than a mouthful of crude alcohol. It would cause severe stomach pains and eventual blindness. Besides which, if the crew had mutinied, why should they leave behind their sea chests, together with such items as family photographs, razors and sea boots? The British Admiralty remained unconvinced, but had to admit that if the alternative theory was correct, and Briggs and Morehouse had decided to make a false claim of salvage, Briggs would actually have lost out by the deal. He was part owner of the ship, and his share of any salvage would have come to a fraction of what he could have made by selling his share in the normal way. In March 1873, the court was finally forced to admit that it was unable to decide why the Mary Celeste had been abandoned. The first time in its history that it failed to come to a definite conclusion. De Gratia's owners were awarded 1/5 of the value of the Mary Celeste and her cargo. The brig herself was returned to her owner, who lost no time in selling her the moment she got back to New York. During the next 11 years, the Mary Celeste had many owners, but brought little profit to any of them. Sailors were convinced she was unlucky. Her last owner, Captain Gilman C. Parker, ran her aground on a reef in the West Indies and made a claim for insurance. The insurers became suspicious, and Parker and his associates were brought to trial. At that time, the penalty for deliberately scuttling a ship on the high seas was death by hanging. But the judge, mindful of the Mary Celeste's previous record of bad luck, allowed the men to be released on a technicality. Within 8 months, Captain Parker was dead. One of the associates had gone mad, and another had committed suicide. The Mary Celeste herself was left to be claimed by the sea, being abandoned on the reef. Over the next decade or so, as no new evidence came to light, interest in the story waned. During the trial, when fraud was still suspected, a careful watch had to be kept on the major ports of England and America, but there was no sign of any of the missing crew. In the year 1882, a 23-year-old, newly qualified doctor called Arthur Doyle moved to Southsea and Portsmouth and screwed up his nameplate. And during the long weeks of waiting for patients, he whiled away the time writing short stories. It was in the autumn of 1882 that he began a story. In the month of December 1873, the British ship De Gratia steered into Gibraltar, having in tow a derelict brigantine, Mary Celeste, which had been picked up at latitude 38 by 40, longitude 70 by 15 west. For such a short sentence, this contains a remarkable number of inaccuracies. The year was actually 1872. The De Gratia did not tow the Mary Celeste. The latter came under its own sail. The latitude and longitude are wrong, and the ship was called plain English Mary, not Marie. All the same, when J. Habakkuk Jefferson's statement was published in the Cornhill magazine in 1884, it caused a sensation, launching Arthur Doyle's career as a writer. He was soon using the name A. Conan Doyle. Most people took it for the truth, and from then on it was widely accepted that the Mary Celeste had been taken over by a kind of black powder leader with a hatred of whites. Mr. Solly Flood, the chief investigator in the Mary Celeste case, was so indignant that he sent a telegram to the Central News Agency announcing J. Habakkuk Jefferson as a fraud and a liar. From then on, the Cornhill was willing to publish most of Conan Doyle's stories as 30 guineas a time instead of 3 guineas he had been paid so far. Doyle's story was the signal for a new interest in the mystery, and over the next few years there was a number of hoax accounts of the last days of the Mary Celeste. They told all kinds of stories, from straightforward mutinies to mass accidents, such as everyone falling into the sea when a platform made to watch a swimming race gave way, or the finding of another derelict carrying gold bullion, which tempted Captain Briggs to leave his own ship drifting while he escaped in the other one. One author argued that all the crew had been dragged through the ship's portholes at night by a ravenous giant squid, whilst Charles Fort, the eminent paranormal researcher, suggested the crew had been snatched away by some strange force that causes rains or fogs on live fish. Fort added, "I have a collection of yarns by highly individualised liars, or artists who scorned in any particular to imitate one another, who told 30, 40 or 50 years later of having been members of his crew. Even today the Mary Celeste often sails unsuspectingly into TV serials and sci-fi movies to become involved in time warps or attacked by aliens and UFOs." In fact, a careful study of the facts reveals that the solution of this particular mystery is obvious. The man most responsible for the perpetuation of the myth about the Mary Celeste was Arthur Conan Doyle. It was he that insisted that the ship's boats were still intact. This small inaccuracy made an otherwise simple problem virtually insoluble. In fact, once we know the boat was missing, we at least know one thing for certain, that the crew abandoned ship, apparently in great haste. The wheel was not lashed, indication that the ship was abandoned in a hurry. The question then presents itself: what could have caused everyone on board to abandon the ship in such a hurry? Captain James Briggs, the brother of the Mary Celeste's skipper, was convinced that the clue lay in the last entry in the log. For the morning of the 25th of November 1872, it stated that the wind had dropped off after a night of heavy squalls. James Briggs believed that the ship may have become becalmed in the Azores and started to drift towards the dangerous rocks of Santa Maria Island. The gash marks found along the side of the Mary Celeste, which the British investigators had claimed were deliberately made by the ship's mutinous crew, may have been made when she actually rubbed against a submerged rock, convincing the crew that the ship was about to sink. Oliver Deveau proposed that during the storm some water had found its way between the decks into the hold, giving the impression that the ship was leaking. Another popular explanation is that a waterspout hit the Mary Celeste. The atmospheric pressure inside a waterspout is low. This could have caused the hatch covers to blow open and forced bilge water into the pump well. This would have made it look as if the ship had taken on 6 to 8 feet of water and was sinking fast. There are basic objections to all of these answers. If the ship scraped dangerous rocks off Santa Maria Island, then the lifeboat would have been close enough to land on the island itself. Since then, no survivors were found and no wreckage from the lifeboat. This seems unlikely. Oliver Deveau's theory has a great deal more in its favour. The three have been often panics at sea. When Captain Cook's Endeavour was in difficulties off the coast of Eastern Australia, the ship's carpenter was sent to take a reading of the water in the hold. He made a mistake and the resulting hysteria might have ended with the crew leaving the ship if Captain Cook had not been able to control the panic. On another occasion, a ship which was carrying a hold full of timber dumped the whole load into the sea off Newfoundland before anyone realised that it would be next impossible to sink a ship full of wood. But it seemed unlikely that a man of Captain Briggs' known efficiency would allow some simple misreading to cause panic. The objection to the waterspout theory is that, apart from the open hatches, the ship was completely undamaged. If a waterspout was big enough to cause such a panic, it would surely have caused far more havoc. In any case, the real mystery is why, if the crew left the Mary Celeste in the lifeboat, they made no attempt to get back on board when they saw the ship was in no danger of sinking. Only one explanation covers all the facts. Briggs had never shipped crude alcohol before, and being a typical New England Puritan, undoubtedly mistrusted it. The change in temperature between New York and the Azores would have caused casks of alcohol to sweat and leak. The night of the storms, in which the barrels would have been shaken violently, would have caused vapour to form inside the casks, slowly building up pressure until the lids of 2 or 3 blew off. The explosion, though basically harmless, might have blown the hatches off the cargo hold onto the deck and the positions which Deveau later found them. Convinced that the whole ship was about to explode, Briggs ordered everyone into the lifeboat. In his haste, he failed to take one simple precaution that would have saved their lives: to secure the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste by only a few 100 yards of cable. The sea was fairly calm when the boat was lowered, as we know from the last entry in the log, but the evidence of the torn sail indicated that the ship then encountered severe gales. We may conjecture that the rising wind blew the Mary Celeste into the distance while the crew in the lifeboat rowed frantically in a futile effort to catch up. The remainder of that story is tragically obvious.